Good morning and good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for dialing into this exciting meeting today. My name is Holly Surratt and I'm the Vice President of Impact Programs and Sustainability at Global Fashion Agenda. And it's a real pleasure for me to be opening today's meeting and to be able to guide you through the exciting program. I'd first like to take a few minutes to introduce our organization, Global Fashion Agenda. We're a non-profit on a mission to transform the fashion industry to becoming net positive. And with that, we mean an industry that gives more to the economy, the natural world, and people and communities than it takes. We monitor the industry's progress towards this vision by considering three main objectives: achieving a living wage for all, zero emissions and pollution, and eliminating waste and drastically reducing the use of virgin resources. We believe that circular fashion systems have the opportunity to deliver on those objectives, but that moving towards more circular systems must be approached through a full value chain lens, considering the global nature of our industry and engaging all of the actors around the world who are part of the value chain, ensuring that value is distributed fairly across them all. As policy relating to circularity increases, especially in for instance, the EU, we see as a global fashion industry that we must ensure manufacturing communities are centered in these discussions, as policies have far-reaching impacts. We must also acknowledge the importance of social impact in circularity, because truly circular doesn't mean that only resources are kept in a closed loop, but that all actors benefit. It is therefore crucial to establish a real business model for circularity and to welcome new actors to the value chain, like sorters, segregators and aggregators, and textile recyclers. We must also truly understand the potential impacts on workers of what a just transition entails. Because circular also means reduction, reducing virgin materials, reducing the burden on our planet, it's important to flag that reduction isn't a traditional characteristic of the fashion industry. Fashion industry is built on a growth model: more product, more material, reaching scale to reduce cost and margin, but also creating more waste. In many circumstances, the current fashion model is one of devaluation. Vast quantities of products are made, aren't sold, or are sold at discount. Instead of treasuring the time, energy, materials, the journey of product that is made, it is wasted because the economic value is perceived as very little. The fashion industry is especially challenged when we see economic decline around the world, with brand sales dropping, orders being reduced, more pressure on prices. And at Global Fashion Agenda, we believe this has to change, and that we are therefore working to identify, together with partners around the world, what the new circular business model is for our industry. We feel this really must be designed together by brands, retailers, manufacturers, and new actors that I mentioned, such as sorters, collectors, and recyclers. What is a new circular fashion system that makes more from less? This is really the backdrop of the Global Circular Fashion Forum. It's a global initiative to spur action in textile manufacturing countries to accelerate and scale the recycling of post-industrial textile waste. This is really a stepping stone to start establishing and scaling ecosystems and textile-to-textile recyclers in preparation of post-consumer waste recycling, which is, of course, a challenging next step. The Global Circular Fashion Forum is hosting the event today, and we look forward to sharing more about our work and how we collaborate with partners around the world over the next few hours. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our funders, as the Global Circular Fashion Forum was established in 2022 with support of GIZ and is now funded through the H&M Foundation. So great thanks to both. And I think we see their logos on the next slide. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank our team, as there are a few of us that are visible today, but we have a great team of production, operations, and program managers and communications team that are working backstage on this project, but also on the event today. Before diving into the agenda, I would like to bring one thing to your attention, and that's that we developed a brilliant playbook for Upstream Circularity that is currently available in 6 languages and can be downloaded for free on our website. This has been a co-creation of many of our partners around the world and features over 20 case studies of different actors who are working to capture and recycle post-industrial textile waste around the world. So into the agenda. We're really honoured to have expert speakers joining us today, and I would like to express a special welcome to Mrs. Amalia Adingar at the Ministry of National Development Planning at Bappenas in Indonesia, the Deputy for Economic Affairs. Selamat siang, Ibu Amalia. Thank you for joining us today. We're starting in plenary, and we have three esteemed speakers who are going to talk about what today's current context is, what the current policy environment is, and unpacking how that influences our key focus countries, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Cambodia today. And then we'll also be hearing from a representative of the Global Circular Fashion Forum Steering Committee, who will introduce the initiative and the impact so far. So the plenary will bring us to a little bit under the hour, and then we'll start with 2 rounds of breakouts. So we'll have a breakout on Vietnam and Bangladesh, and then a break. We'll come back in a plenary format to discuss what the key takeaways were from those both breakouts, and then we'll go into a second round on Cambodia and Indonesia, and then end plenary again. It's a full schedule. It's intended to be an interactive meeting, so we welcome you to share where you're dialing in from over the chat, but also to ask us questions using the chat function and interact with us through the polls. And of course, we always welcome to hear your feedback and ideas on how we can complete future events. So towards the end, we'll also invite you to participate in a survey and provide more information on how you can participate in the programs and access our resources. So with that, I would like to say thank you again. I would like to introduce Mrs. Christiana Dolver-Thornberg, who's the Head of Innovation, Research and Documentation at H&M Foundation. And thanks again for the wonderful partnership. Over to you, Christiana.
Thank you so much, Holly. Thanks for having me, and thanks for both the great introduction and for putting together this program. I really look forward to the coming hours. So when Holly asked me if I would like to do an introduction looking and reflecting on the industry's zeitgeists, I thought, yeah, absolutely. And then a second later, I thought, hang on, what's zeitgeist? So if you're like me, that maybe don't use this word on a weekly basis, or if you're not German speaking, I've looked it up for you. So zeitgeist can be translated as the spirit of the age, looking at intellectual, moral, or cultural climates that affect an era. Then I thought, well, Holly, that's not a small task to try and reflect on that, because can you even reflect on what is influencing an era at the same time as you're living within that area? Isn't that type of insight something that comes with hindsight? Because while we are participating in the current, it's hard to zoom out and see the broader picture. I can reflect on maybe what has happened in the industry and on the topic of sustainability since when I graduated from Stockholm Resilience Center 2 years before the planetary boundaries was even a concept, and up until today. But that is more reviewing history than looking at our current time. I could also go down the avenue of listing. Here are 5 key topics that I think is influencing where we are today when it comes to sustainability and circularity in the textile and fashion industry. And then we could go on to talk about traceability, transparency, collaboration. But in this day and age, I think ChatGPT could give us that in a second, equipped with emojis for every bullet point ready for you to post on LinkedIn. Looking at zeitgeist, the word again, it also more literally could be translated into an invisible agent, a force, or even a demon dominating the characteristics of an epoch in history, which means that we're looking at something that's not tangible. So it's not talking about the CSRD, SETI, HD, FEM, FSLM, GRS, SLCP, or GCFFs of this industry. If you know all of those abbreviations, you can give yourself a gold star at the end of this session. These are not invisible agents. These are tools that we all try to apply to reach progress. We're looking at something less tangible, which means that I will go out on a limb here and reflect a little bit on some things that I feel working in the industry, trying to drive progress towards an inclusive and planet-positive textile industry, and having done so for a while, with the hunch that if there is an itch or a feeling I might have, hopefully that is something that maybe is recognized by others. And I think the word that best explains those itches are paradoxes. A paradox is a situation or a concept that appears to be self-contradictory or perhaps even a bit absurd and feels quite impossible. And I have to admit that working on these topics in today's climate can tick some of those boxes. You have the paradox of demand for sustainability on the one end, and then the growth of ultra-fast fashion on the other end. So how do we deal with the disconnect between values that are maybe inherent in us as individuals and our behaviors as customers? And what does drivers like affordability, convenience, and trends do to that? I think it comes across in the paradox between innovation on the one side and the scale paradox on the other side. There are so many breakthroughs in innovative new materials, the myceliums, the bio-based, in new recycling technologies. And at the same time, a lot of them are stuck at really small volumes and face barriers like cost, supply chain constraints, and infrastructure to scale. I think perhaps the most significant paradox this year was the excitement around new recycling solutions, coupled with the bankruptcy of Renewcell. I also do think that we have paradoxes around ambition versus reality. So we're an industry that prides ourselves in setting ambitious science-based climate targets, yet emissions rise due to increased production volumes and the core issues of overproduction or overconsumption. How do we deal with that paradox? Circularity, I do also think, has the similar type of paradoxes between the excitement around resell, repair, secondhand on the one hand, and the paradox of the dominant business model being super streamlined to be completely linear. We're striving for transparency, while at the same time trying to make a notorious complex and opaque supply chain transparent. That's a paradox. And to round off on this list of different paradoxes that I do think are affecting all of us working with this, I think this year with a lot of regulations, I do also believe that there is a possible paradox between regulations on the one side that we believe will drive necessary change and innovation on the other side. Can compliance divert our attention away from creative, bold innovations? Paradoxes like these are inevitable, and I do think that they affect all of us working, whether we are a brand, a manufacturer, recycler, collector, sorter, NGO, nonprofit, for-profit, and I think we need to embrace them. So instead of having all of these kind of contradictory, seemingly almost absurd paradoxes deflate the rest of this conversation today, I think that we need to review the flip side of paradoxes, which is that they challenge our logical thinking and forces us to engage with ideas that defy simple categorizations. So if there is anything I believe should be the outcome of being faced with paradoxes like the ones I mentioned, I do think that one, they stimulate critical thinking. They expand the limits of how we think about something, which in turn will stimulate true innovation. Paradoxes are behind a lot of the different groundbreaking discoveries and innovative solutions that we have today. I do also believe that the paradoxes forces us to embrace complexity. We know that life and relationships are complex. Industries and systems are never black and white either. So dealing with paradoxes help us to accept that seemingly contradictory ideas can both hold some truth, and it encourages holistic thinking and us embracing the system change thinking that is needed. That Holly also alluded to, looking at all the different actors that need to be around the table if we're really going to drive change. I do believe that paradoxes foster resilience. Being faced with these contradictory forces, it equips us to better handle uncertainties and change, which I do believe are traits that are very much needed if we're going to drive progress in this era. And last and most importantly, I do think that these paradoxes promote collaboration. Because if it's anything that becomes visible and true when you look at this, is that it requires diverse perspectives and diverse expertises and diverse voices around the table now more than ever, if we're going to overcome these different challenges and make them into opportunities. So back to the zeitgeist. Ultimately, the true spirit of the age can only be crystallized through the lens of history. So who am I to say what is the most significant spirit of today's era around sustainability in the textile industry? Time will allow us to get back on that, and then we can discern the patterns and forces that shaped where we are today. But my hope and my belief is that despite the paradoxes, or perhaps thanks to them, innovation, holistic system thinking, resilience, and collaboration will be the invisible agents and the spirit that flows through everything that we do, and something that we will be able to look back on in pride. So with that said, I look forward to having all of those forces infuse the discussions and our listening and our engagement during the coming hours, and more importantly, during the coming years, where we will all drive progress together, both towards an inclusive, a circular, and a planet-positive textile industry. So with that, enjoy the discussions.
Thank you so much, Christiana, for that incredibly insightful opening and also reflection on what zeitgeist is, but also how it can be shaped and putting forward your hope for us to stimulate critical thinking, embrace complexity, encourage a holistic systems approach, foster resilience and promote collaboration. I believe that's a wonderful setting, not only for the transformation that the industry needs, but also for today's breakout sessions as well. So huge thank you, and I hope everyone watching online, congratulates you on that opening as well. So with that, we will go to our next speaker, Marta Inchausti Moya, who's the Public Affairs Manager at Global Fashion Agenda, to help us start unpacking policy. Over to you, Marta.
Thank you, Holly, and good morning, everyone. Thank Christiana also for mentioning regulation in your opening address. Indeed, regulation brings hope, but it also brings many paradoxes. And indeed, as we are going to see in this session, there's a lot of compliance to be made. So hopefully that does indeed not distract the attention from bold innovation. So today we have a small agenda, but basically what I wanted to do is run you through textile legislation in the EU, because quite a lot has happened in the past 5 years. I also want to speak to you about how companies are gearing for compliance and how is this EU legislation going to affect regions outside of the EU. Finally, I also want to briefly touch upon some policy perspective in Asia. This is not very exhaustive, but just to give you a little taste of what's happening in Asia. If we can move forward, please. Yes. So what you see on this slide is the more than 16 pieces of legislation that have been adopted since the first mandate of Ursula von der Leyen. So as you know, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, she was firstly elected in 2019, and she came in with very strong ambitions, both in terms of green and circular perspectives. As part of these ambitions, she introduced in 2019 the European Green Deal, and in 2020, the Circular Economy Action Plan. As a result of these two broad ambitions, she also brought to the table what is known as the EU Strategy for Sustainable and Circular Textiles. This strategy brings a vision for 2030 describing the future of textile products and the textile ecosystem. What we can see on this slide is the more than 16 pieces of legislation that were put in the table. We can categorize them basically in two different groups. The first one, company legislation, which is that has to do with internal processes of companies. In this category, we have, for example, the corporate sustainability due diligence, or everything that has to do with wages or ban of products made with forced labor. The other type of legislation that we can see is product legislation. Product legislation involves many areas, from the design to how do we communicate on the product, how we dispose of the product, how do we label the product. So as you can see, it really covers the whole value chain, and it covers all the different parts of a product. This is also very substantial if we look at this slide, because if we look at 2019, the fashion industry was highly unregulated. It was only with the introduction of the EU textile strategy for sustainable textiles that the spotlight really came to the industry, and we moved from 2019 to not having anything on the table to 2025 now, with more than 16 proposals on the table. And that, of course, brings many compliance challenges. I don't want, if we can stay on the slide before, I don't want to go into detail into all of these pieces of legislation, but I do want to encourage you to check out our policy matrices, because in Global Fashion Agenda, we aim at unpacking these complex pieces of legislation, and for that we have created both an EU and an Americas policy matrix, where you can understand what each of these pieces of legislation is bringing to the table, how are companies going to be affected by them, and by when. So with this, I'm moving on to the next slide. But first of all, I also want to hear from you. Yeah, here there's a poll. We would like to hear, what is the biggest challenge for manufacturers in Asia when preparing to meet EU textile regulation? All right. All right, we have answers. So with 42% of the votes, we see that the highest challenge is the high cost of adapting processes to meet standards. Yes, we're going to touch upon this in later on the session, but indeed this is something that we've been hearing. It's quite worrisome. But looking at our slide here, as you saw in the slide before, there's more than 16 pieces of legislation on the table. However, many of these legislation, regulations or directives, they are yet not fully adopted. Or if they are adopted, they need further specification via what we call secondary legislation, which is delegated or implementing acts. That means that even though we have somewhat a good overview and understanding of how the policy landscape looks, there's many questions that remain open on the concrete obligations for companies and how they should then prepare for compliance. Until we have the final texts and the final delegated and implementing acts, what we can abstract, and that is common to most of the legislation that has been adopted, is the 4 points that you see here on screen. The first of which, companies need to start looking at eco-design from a perspective of durability, recyclability, repairability, and recycled content. So products that are not designed bearing these parameters in mind will not succeed to comply with legislation. Secondly, there's going to be a lot of demands for information. There's going to be an increased demand for traceability and transparency, because one or the main way to prove compliance with European legislation it's going to be providing data and making sure that you can report on the product aspects, but also on what's happening down the supply chain. So for that, companies need to have more transparency and more traceability, and they need to be able to convey that. Very linked to the second one, there's going to be an increased need to map the supply chain from bottom to top. And there's going to be an increased need to also get in touch with suppliers, because in the end, they are the ones who hold this information, and we're going to see an increased demand of information from companies down their supply chain. And finally, a big word for, I would say, the past 5 years, due diligence. Companies need to start looking into having risk assessments and due diligence process in place, because that will be fundamental to make sure that they are compliant with the legislation that is to come. Moving on, and again, we also want to hear from you. Particularly, we would like to know for you, what is the most pressing policy gap that impacts your ability to adopt circular practices? Is that the lack of mandates for extended producer responsibility? Is it the weak enforcement of recycling or waste management laws? Or is it the absence of financial incentives for sustainable investments or limited investment in recycling or processing infrastructure? We're just going to give a few seconds. All right. We have somewhat not a draw, but two main pressing policy gaps. One being the absence of financial incentives, and the other one being limited investment in recycling or processing infrastructure. Thank you for sharing your views. Very linked to that, and what you can see in this slide is how will EU legislation impact abroad? So EU legislation applies to all companies that place products in the EU market, regardless of where they are based. Each piece of legislation has a specific scope. So some apply to listed companies, some apply to larger companies, medium-sized companies. So the scope of who has to comply varies. However, as I was saying before, for EU companies, no matter the size, in order to be able to fulfill their obligations, they will necessitate more and more data from their suppliers to comply with these transparency and traceability obligations that we were introducing before. So as a result, manufacturers in the EU and abroad will see an increased demand for information from their clients on all aspects of the ESG. These for manufacturers will likely require additional investment in software, machinery, and training. Here in this slide, what you can see are some examples of the information that might be requested from companies to their manufacturers. I don't want to get in detail into all of them, but just to put a few examples as part of the forced labor regulation, which, as the title indicates, tries to ban the introduction of products that have forced labor in the EU market. This is only one, but there's many other examples inside of this regulation. One of the things that it will be requiring is for companies to provide evidence of due diligence efforts on the value chain to roll out the existence of forced labor. So for that, of course, companies are going to have to collaborate with their supply chain, and they're going to need that information from the bottom. Same happens with the deforestation regulation, which tries to ban the introduction of products that contain deforestation in the EU. One of the requirements for companies is to trace the location of plots of lands that are involved in the cultivation of raw material. Then again, companies need to go all the way down to their supply chain in order to obtain this information. Maybe lastly, and because it's a big name and it's been heard of quite a lot, this term, the due diligence directive, also known as the CSDDD, basically introduces for companies the obligation to identify, assess, prevent, mitigate, and remedy the negative impacts of business activities on human rights and on the environment. So as you can see, this is sounds small, but it's quite big, and it will require a lot of placing of due diligence processes for companies, not only to identify, but also to make sure that if they identify, they prevent, or when they can, mitigate these impacts from their business activities. And for that, again, collaboration with their supply chain will be key as the only way to complying with the requirements of the directive. So we also hear from suppliers who are frequently concerned about sharing proprietary information that could reveal competitive advantages or sensitive operational details. However, the supply chain is going to need to have a dialogue, and the sooner we start having this dialogue, the better, because it's also true that in the end, EU industry will partner with, needs to partner with national governments to make sure that the industry in those partner countries is aware of EU legislation, it's aware of the information that will be required from them, and they're able to adapt and to meet to these new requirements requested by the companies. Countries that fail to adapt their industry to this new reality will be somewhat at a discompetitive advantage, because of course companies will only want to collaborate with those manufacturers that are able to live up to the standards that they need to, at the same time, prove compliance with. The next slide shows an example. This is for the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive again. This is just a very brief simplification, of course, of the supply chain, but this company X that falls in the scope of the Due Diligence Directive will have to look at its supply chain for its own operation, but also of its subsidiaries. And that will involve looking through the sourcing, through the manufacturing, through the design and development, transport, through the user phase, and later on through the end of life of the product until it's disposed and later on recycled. So all to say, lots of tracing to do, lots of transparency needed, and for that collaboration will be certainly key. And moving on to our last slide for today. And we also want to hear from you. We have our last poll question. Here we want to know what type of policy support would most help manufacturers transition towards circular practices. Would that be subsidies for adopting sustainable technologies? Would that be tax breaks for using recycled materials or investing in recycling? Would that be government-mandated minimum standards for circularity in textiles? Or would that be increased investment in infrastructure for waste collection and recycling? All right, we have the results. Okay, this one, it's a little bit of a draw. I see that the 4 categories are up there with 26, 28, 24, 21. But yeah, indeed, good to know that the concerns are multiple and that the support is needed on many areas. And linking with that, and to finalize today's policy presentation, without being exhaustive, because of course there's many legislation in place in these 4 countries, we did want to share a little overview of policy impacting textile sector in the regions of the Global Circular Fashion Forum. What we see in common for these 4 countries is that they are all having in place some sort of legislation for minimum wages and standards for workers. So, for example, if we look at Indonesia, we have the Omnibus Law that promotes regional minimum wage. In Vietnam, we have the Labor Code that also regulates labor standards and expands protections to workers that don't have formal contracts. And in Cambodia, we have a law on minimum wage, particularly for textile, garment, and footwear sectors. And in Bangladesh, Bangladesh is well known for the Bangladesh Accord to ensure health and safety measures in factories. But they also have, since 2006, the Bangladesh Labor Act that introduces some sort of standards for labor rights and employer relationships. What we found quite interesting was to see some progress or some similarities with EU policies both in Indonesia and Cambodia. In Cambodia, the transformative map for textile and apparel industry of 2023 to 2027 somewhat rings a bell to the roadmap established by the European Union in the Circular Strategy for Textiles. And it seeks to transform the industry through sustainability, technology, and skills, and improved governance. So very, very excited to see that piece of legislation in place. And in Indonesia, still ongoing, it's a draft decree on mandatory implementation of technical specifications for clothing. So it will mandate that products that are imported, distributed, or produced in Indonesia come together with their technical specifications. So a little bit like the EU textile labeling regulation or some similarity with the digital product passport. But with this, I would like to thank you all for your time today. I hope that this little peek in policy has interested you to dig even further, and we hope that you also have the chance to look into our policy matrices. And we'll continue to look over policy in Asia, and very excited to tap into this region and to see more policy progress in all 4 countries of the Global Circular Fashion Forum. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marta, for this brilliant lay of the land on what we see happening in policy. There are quite a few questions coming in over the chat, and time considering, I think it would be best if we take them offline. But just for the audience to know, so one of the questions is what the maturity is of the legislations that you presented, if they're formal or fixed, or if they're still in idea stage, and if they're going to be implemented across all EU countries. Another question is around the amount of revenue or number of units sold by country and what legislation applies to them. And then how the OECD guidelines relate to the EU legislations as well. Oh, and then also what the penalties are for non-compliance. So super, Marta, if you can support with some live answers over the chat, and also a few requests to receive your presentation, which I'm sure we can share afterwards.
For sure. And otherwise, just invite everyone to reach out to the policy team at GFA. At the end of the presentation, we will be sharing the email addresses. So please, if you want to exchange or if you have any more questions that are not solved in the chat, to invite you to submit other policy questions via email as well.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Marta. So then we'll move on to our third and final speaker of the plenary session. Mr. Edwin Kay, who's the advisor at the Hong Kong Research Institute for Textile and Apparel, and he's also a steering committee member for the Global Circular Fashion Forum. Over to you, Edwin. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much, Holly, and good morning and good afternoon to everybody. If we can go to the next slide. So my name is Edwin, and I'm with the Hong Kong Research Institute for Textile and Apparel. We're an applied research center, but I speak today as a steering committee member of the Global Circular Fashion Forum. And I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes to talk about what is it that we're trying to do at the Global Circular Fashion Forum. So this is an initiative to do 3 things to work on reusing post-industrial textile waste in the supply chain, in the manufacturing countries. And we do this in three ways. First of all, we work on the use case. So we mobilized a commitment on the use side to ensure that brands are using these resources as they are being generated in the manufacturing countries. And then secondly, to support the development of good practices and use and technology and know-how in the manufacturing economy, so that they're committed to, and they will put these resources back into our supply chains. Secondly is to share about knowledge and best practices. We are working across many countries, and we'll talk a little bit about it on the next slide. But we want to share, talk about what are the things that we've learned through the process. What are the things that are obstacles, and we want to get insight and develop tools to help all of us, so that we can learn and we can do this better and more efficiently as we proceed through in our supply chain process. And thirdly, we want to establish national level partnerships, and this is I think one of the more ambitious challenges for us is to make sure that we create these national platforms, so that we can scale and we can make national impact that is visible and tangible. And we do this across the entire industry, and we want to do this to make sure that this benefits not only the brands that are involved, but also the manufacturing countries that are involved. If we go to the next slide, you will see that that already we have several countries that are in the partnership in various stages of development. Bangladesh and Cambodia are already far along, and they're at the scaling phase of this. So a lot's going on there already, and I'm very optimistic about making sure this rolls out, and we'll see more and more of the results in those economies. And then Vietnam and Indonesia are in the piloting phase, getting our tools together, getting our partnerships together. And then Turkey is in the design phase, our next economy. Here you also can see that we are working with a lot of various national, international NGOs and national stakeholders, so that we can have resources on the ground and in country. You'll see that there's a lot of work that is being done, but it is really done with a lot of involvement and commitment at the national level. If we go to the next slide, you will see this is the list of the rest of the steering committee that have been working on this, and you see that it runs the entire gamut of manufacturers to brands, resource providers, technology providers, and national, international stakeholders that are working together and making sure that we certainly work on this in the most efficient and the most effective manner. And it hasn't been a group that have been very sitting around in conference rooms talking about things. There has certainly been a lot of activity and action. And we go to the next slide, you can see some of the highlights of things that we have done in this past year. And a lot of these are in country with a lot of work being done and getting our hands dirty and trying to understand what is going on, and trying to look at all the national differences and the national opportunities. So lots of work being done, very exciting. A couple of highlights. I think Holly alluded to the playbook, which is just a launch. We're very excited. We certainly are very excited about this useful tool. We believe that it will be something that will help us understand, engage a lot more about what is going on, and we'll get a lot of feedback as these things roll out, so that the version 2 of this, I'm sure, will be even better. Finally, I want to point to some of the impact that this has has already been made. So we go to the next slide. You will see that not only have there been a lot of communication and conversation about what we've been doing, the playbook, which is available in multiple languages, so that it is understandable and accessible at various national levels. Tangibly, the 6 million tons of waste already identified and segregated and so rolled out as a use case study, and all the work that has been going on to make sure that we are beginning to make an impact and drive change so that we can impact circularity in our supply and all of our supply chains. I am very conscious that as we are meeting today, we are weeks and days away from 2025, and that we all have 2025 and 2030 KPIs, goals, and aspirations for circularity and for sustainability. And efforts like this could really support everything that we do, because as we enter into 2025, it could we're getting close to either a point of no return, or hopefully we will be entering a phase in which we hit the tipping point, or an inflection point in which everything that we're doing really hits the momentum and drives the changes that we need, so that when we all meet again in 2030, we can celebrate all the good work that's been done through this and all of our various efforts. Thank you, and I'm sure there are questions. Please direct those into the chat, and we'll see what we can address. Back to you, Holly.
Thank you so much, Edwin, for speaking on behalf of the steering committee. And of course, we also have to acknowledge all of the incredible research and innovation and work that you've been leading over the past years in the industry, and a recommendation to everyone to check out the website of HK Rita if you haven't already. Looking at the Green Machine for one, I would definitely see tying in together what Christiana was talking to you about, the inflection points also on innovation and what you're working on. So huge thanks for your contribution. So now we go into our first round of breakout sessions. I'm incredibly excited. We'll have one breakout session that's focusing on the current context in Vietnam, the incredible work that the team at GIZ have been doing so far, how GFA has been working with different stakeholders to identify a vision and a roadmap for circularity in Vietnam, and also to talk about what recommendations are for reform, looking at policy as well to really stimulate textile recycling. So very happy to have a diverse group of stakeholders from both the academic community, brands, recyclers, and development organizations there. And then the second breakout is on Bangladesh. And this is where we initially started working on the Circular Fashion Partnership back in 2020, but are now very excited to be part of the team facilitating a switch to Upstream Circularity pilot with bestseller BGMEA Reverse Resources and stimulated by UNIDO. So what will happen is you will soon see a pop-up in your screen, and then you can choose which of these breakouts you would like to participate in. Then our moderators will guide you through the session, and then at the end, everyone will be automatically sent back to this space. At least that's the plan. So yeah, please enjoy the breakout. Click on the link when you see it pop up, and then we'll see you back here in about 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And again, yeah, please use the chat function or the Q&A to answer any questions. We're doing our best to answer them live. Some of the more technical questions we might take after the meeting. But enjoy and see you here shortly. Hello, everyone. I think many of us are now dialing back into the main webinar. So thank you for participating in the breakouts. Or thank you to those who weren't able to participate in the breakouts but are still with us. We talked about how we have to navigate complexity, how we have to work in paradoxes and look at challenging situations. And I think how we communicate, the technology that we use are also hurdles that we needed to overcome to facilitate these broader collaborations around the world. And yes, huge apologies for those who faced technical difficulties joining the case studies. I was one of them. We'd like to take a few minutes to reflect as a broader group and to hear what were the 3 main takeaways or a few key messages that were discussed in the webinars, in the case studies on Bangladesh and Vietnam. So I'd like to start and introduce our Impact Program Manager, Sonia Hilling, who was leading the Bangladesh session.
Yeah, thank you so much. We had a very insightful session, and unfortunately too short because there was a lot of questions and a lot of input. But our topic was on actionable ways to include informal actors in the circular textile value chain in Bangladesh. And there was like a very good point made by Mark from UNIDO in like mentioning that like the informal sector is one of the barriers. And we do acknowledge that across the industry or in Bangladesh, like there is already like a lot more knowledge and understanding of the value of recycling textile waste. That there's already a lot of successful practices and collaboration between manufacturers, waste handlers, and recyclers. And what is needed now, what we heard from like Mark and from Vidya is that it's more of like, what is the strategy? What is the country's strategy to tackle the waste management in the country? And really to understand like what is their vision, what is their strategy in order to scale. And there's also like financing that is needed for like machinery and renewable energy. Yeah, so it's a big picture, but very much underway.
Thanks so much for sharing, Sonia. And I'm sure people can learn more about the work in Bangladesh on our website or reaching out to our team. And yeah, I think it is exciting because I know you were also talking about what potential solutions are already there, at least what approaches are there to really engage informal actors. And I know one of our partners, Reverse Resources, has been working on a code of conduct and really looking at compliance and actually supporting those actors in becoming part of the value chain. And there are a few other initiatives there. So definitely not starting from scratch. Great, then we'll go over to our other Impact Program Manager, Camilla Morandi, and you were moderating the session on Vietnam. And I do have to apologize because I know one of our speakers was stuck in the main area. So I'm sure you had to start without him.
Yes, yeah, thank you, Holly. Yeah, indeed, it was a little bit of an exercise of flexibility, but I think we still had a great panel discussion, a little bit shorter than expected for this reason, but it was very very insightful. And the overall picture that came out from the panel discussion is that Vietnam and circularity systems in Vietnam for textile industry is quite of a dynamic landscape, and it's still at the early stage, also agreed upon with the other panelists. There are a few things that will help to enhance circularity according to different speakers. Learning from other industries is a must. Engaging with policymakers is also very, very important, and also to regulate the amount of textiles imports that the textile waste imports that can actually allow for enhancing and scaling up circularity in the industry. We have seen, of course, that textile waste itself as feedstock is problematic to be shipped around countries. However, there is a certain amount of textile that should be allowed to be traded for circularity to really scale up. We also heard from a brand, from Puma, regarding their targets that they set on circularity, and the suggestions on being bold, sharing the targets, creating this collaborative space across the industry, but also the very important part of training the suppliers, not leaving them behind, which is also a perspective that came out from Cyrus and also from GIZ, is to really include all the stakeholders within this training and with this sharing the knowledge, so that you don't leave some stakeholders behind. I think that's a very crucial aspect of scaling up circularity in any country, but especially it came out in the session on Vietnam.
Thanks so much for sharing, Camilla. And I can see Sonia nodding there as well. Wonderful. So we will be making meeting reports on the different case studies. So if you weren't able to join, we can send them to you after the meeting today. We're now going to take a short break to iron out some of the production. So we'll be back at 1:15, and then we'll go into the 2 final breakouts looking at capacity building strategies to advance circularity in Cambodia, and how we can shape collective action to accelerate Indonesia's circular textile strategy. So feel free to have a break, refresh, and then come back to us at 1:15. So in Europe, that's 11:15. And I don't know off the top of my head the other time zones, but yeah, see you shortly, and thank you for bearing with us. And then we'll be back for Indonesia and Cambodia. Hello, everyone. We hope you had a great few-minute break. And yes, as I mentioned, we'll be starting the second round of breakout shortly. So the first breakout session is going to be on capacity building strategies to advance circularity in textiles in Cambodia. I will be delighted to welcome our colleagues from GIZ who've been working with the past year and a half, and who've been piloting ways to advance circularity and textile waste management processes, and also with a brand and manufacturer representation. And then on the Indonesia breakout session, which is the second one, we'll be talking about how we can shape collective action to accelerate Indonesia's circular textile strategy. And there we're incredibly honoured to be welcoming our special guest, Mrs. Amalia Adinga from the Ministry of National Development Planning, Bappenas, Deputy for Economic Affairs in Indonesia. Selamat siang, Ibu Amalia, and also very happy to welcome our partners from Rantai Textile Lestari and Closed Loop Fashion. So a big welcome to you all. Hello, everyone. I think we're gradually transitioning back from the breakout sessions.
Thank you.
Give a moment to virtually transfer over. And I hope you all had brilliant sessions on the case in Cambodia and the case in Indonesia. And I'd love to give our moderators and potentially the speakers in those panels the opportunity to share some reflections with the broader audience. And perhaps, should we start with you, Sonia? And so looking at the Indonesia case.
Yes, thank you so much. We had a very insightful session on Indonesia, and we had the honor of having Ibu Amelia with us, who presented the national circular economy strategy. So I think that was very a key information here, because it's showing that the government has a roadmap and has a clear strategy. Now the question that is needed, and this is what we're doing through the CFP program in Indonesia, is now building the business case for it. So because Indonesia has a very long history in the textile industry, Indonesia also already have recycling system in place, but it's looking into more downcycling, whereas we are now looking into maintaining and keeping the high value of the textile. So the key was really to understand how to build the ecosystem, really include all the necessary stakeholders, inviting the investors. That was the main important one. But in order to do that, we need numbers and we need to understand the landscape. So that's that's the first step of our project. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Sonia. Ipu Amalia, well, is there anything that you'd also like to share with the group? Because we're delighted that you could join today after seeing you in Jakarta a few months ago.
Yes, I mean, like, I think Sonia has already summed up our discussion. What I can underline is that the business case for Indonesia is important, and secondly, partnership, government, business actors, and also researchers will be very important to find the right technology. And then the third one is that the society awareness itself to be able to provide a new business opportunity, to provide the right supply for the feedstock to the recycling industry. So building the right ecosystem is very important to be able to implement the circularities or circular economy in the textile industry. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so then we will just go over to you, Camilla, and would love to hear what your discussion, what the key points were there for Cambodia.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And yes, for everyone that was not in the session of Cambodia, just maybe setting the scene, we have just concluded a pilot project on post-industrial waste collection, recycling and sorting in the country. So we have heard from participants from the pilot, but also we have talked about what is necessary to then scale up and continue the work that we are doing with the new CFP Cambodia launching today. So one element that came out across the entire panel discussion was really the importance of building strong relationships throughout the extended supply chain. So not just with the main suppliers of brands that are participating, but also including waste handlers, informal recyclers. So really having all the stakeholders included, which is also quite challenging, of course. This is not an easy feat, but it's a crucial step to not leave stakeholders behind and really to include the entire system in this change. Trainings for informal recyclers and for waste handlers also need to be included, not just for factories. We have also heard that the importance of brand participation to collective action to really scale up the efforts and to also share the learnings. I think that's very, very important to just see, okay, it's not going to be all roses and there's going to be challenges, and the most important thing is to really be together and to share the learnings and to really also find the solutions, just like we heard with the factory that was participating, Amble Apparel. They had issues, they had challenges, and then they managed to overcome them by setting up governance systems inside of the factories together with the support of the pilot partners. So I think that's a great achievement. And also the last thing that I want to share is that we really need to prove that that waste is valuable, and this is a great way to do so, because you really can gather waste and you can put it to recycling, and then hopefully also that be uptaken by brands in their collections.
Thank you so much for sharing, Camilla, as well. So we are approaching the end of this webinar today, and just have a few last points to share with you. And first, it's really a sentiment of gratitude. So a gratitude for all of our brilliant partners that we work with, gratitude to all of our speakers today and all of the participants as well for your patience with us around their technical challenges, but also for your bravery in sharing about the work that you're doing that is new. It's breaking the current system, it's shaping something that we haven't done before and will be a trial and error case. It's not a perfect scenario to start with. So we really appreciate facilitating this sharing on what your experiences have been. And we really believe that is an essence of building a new system together. There's much more work to do, but I feel there's also impressive work that's already been demonstrated so far. And we hope you'll join us on this journey. So we'd like to share a few ways that you can continue your engagement with us. Of course, you can sign up for our newsletter. So a lot of our information is at www.globalfashionagenda.org, where you can sign up for our newsletter, but also access all of our resources that are all freely available. The Upstream Circularity Playbook is the resource that's available in 6 languages that we just published, and we encourage you to download that on the resources section. We'll also share this slide deck or the key components of it after the meeting with all participants. Within the Upstream Circularity Playbook, so within the report, there's also a survey, and we're incredibly keen to capture insights from actors working in the value chain around the world that we can use to further tailor the programs to meet your needs. So yeah, great recommendation to please participate in that survey. And then also to save the date, we have our annual Global Fashion Summit on the 3rd to the 5th of June in Copenhagen. With any questions, you can reach out to any of our team members, or we have the cfp@globalfashionagenda.org email. And of course, we'll be willing to support you with any answers or provide links to the resources. Participation in all of the circular fashion partnerships is open. We're currently, today we soft launched the work in Cambodia. Indonesia is already live, as is Bangladesh, and we expect to start work in Vietnam mid next year as well. But of course, GIZ are already doing a lot of work there that you can already participate in. So with that, I have a final thank you to all of our partners, to UNIDO supporting the switch to upstream circularity projects in Bangladesh, to GIZ who supported the establishment of the Global Circular Fashion Forum, but is also supporting our work in Cambodia and Vietnam, and to H&M Foundation that's really supporting everything that we're currently doing in this field. Then I want to thank BGMEA, who's our national lead in Bangladesh, Rantai Textile Lestari, who's our national lead in Indonesia, and of course our implementation partners, Circular Economy, who supports us with capacity building around the world, Closed Loop Fashion, who specialised in textile waste management training and consulting, and Reverse Resources, who's our key partner on traceability and really understanding what waste quantities there are around the world and how we can connect them to recycling solutions amongst all. GFA has a role as a facilitator, and this is one of the key issues around the world that we hope to facilitate collective action in, and are very glad to be doing that with our expert partners, grantors, and of course all the brands, manufacturers, recyclers and waste collectors we're working with. Please reach out to us. We hope this was a meaningful session to you, and send thanks to everyone again, and wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you. Goodbye.